Hi, Ellie. I'm so excited to talk with you today for our third issue of Bloodletter magazine. I am delighted to talk with you and so grateful and honored to share a little bit about your work with our audience. I wanted to start off by asking you, I know that you moved from Cameroon to the US when you were 5, and French was your first language. So I was wondering, did the feeling of otherness that you've described in your childhood kind of inform a desire in your filmmaking to make movies about outsiders? Because I feel like that's a little bit of a consistent theme in your work.
Definitely. And it's not even something I was consciously aware of. It's just something that kind of seeped into my work because of the way that I related to other people. And I think yeah, I felt as a child trying to connect with kids in this country, this new country, the language barrier being an issue, getting teased for my accent, and understanding at a young age that somehow I'm different, but not understanding why I'm different, you know. But I think that it made me go inward, and it made me a very introverted kid. And ironically, it made me much more observant.
Mm.
And I think that those qualities really fed into my way of looking at the world and into my writing quite directly. So it it does come back, it does recur in my work quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you find that movies were kind of a source of solace for you, or
Yeah.
did your interest come later on? It
No,
did.
no, no. From pretty early on. Because although I have three other siblings, and I would say that both my brother and I, who were the two middle kids, we sort of we looked to I think we both fell into films quite early. And it became our way of sort of canceling out the noise around us, and also because we were just at that age where we were obsessed with with what was going on. We were like renting movies and watching movies at home. And because we didn't have a lot of friends, and it was sort of our, it was a tight knit family, and this was our way of, of, having fun, I guess. We weren't even much like the outdoorsy kind of kids. We were just like basically stuck in front of our television,
I
for
definitely
better
relate
or
to that.
worse. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you go to Blockbuster and look at the VHS covers and
Yes.
go from there?
Yes, we were renting like 4 or 5 movies a week, just scouring through the selections. Whatever our parents would allow us to rent is what so it was a lot of horror, a lot of sci-fi, a lot of fantasy, a lot of kid stuff, but also like watching what was on TV, when our parents weren't around. So that's how we discovered a lot of classic films, a lot of early Scorsese. Um, yeah, and I think just being exposed to that breadth of like of 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 films, and of different styles, of different auteurs, it started to inform something in me in terms of storytelling and what's possible visually. It's interesting because I started to draw, I think maybe around 7 or 8, maybe 9, as a way to sort of process some of the imagery that I was seeing in film.
Mm.
Um, I didn't connect the two at the time, but I'm now connecting it as an adult, because it just seemed to come out of nowhere for my parents,
Oh, that's
but I
so,
don't think it did. Yeah.
yeah, that's fascinating. And you know what was so interesting about that time that doesn't happen anymore because of streaming is that you would turn on the TV and see some shit you probably should not have been watching. And it just was like,
Exactly.
whatever happened, happened.
It was great. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that it in a way forced me to grow up and to start to, even though some of the stuff I remember watching this film with De Niro and Meryl Streep, called Falling in Love. And I think I was like 10 or 11 when I saw it on TV. And there's this one scene where they're both married to other people and they're having, just starting to have an affair. And of course, at this age, I don't really understand what's going on. But there's one scene where they decide that they're finally going to consummate this thing, and she decides to back out. And she's calling Robert De Niro's character to tell him that she's not coming to meet him. I don't know what's going on. All I know is, but I understand this feeling of like, I really want to do this thing, but if I do this thing, it is the end of me. It's like I am descending into the spiral of like, I've lost myself completely. And so I remember this moment distinctly because it's weird that as such a young person, I could key into that emotion. And then I started writing. I mean, I started writing early, but then it just really spurred my writing that I could, I don't know, there was this obsession with characters and what's happening emotionally, what's happening underneath the scene that started to push my writing at that age.
Well, that's so fascinating because that kind of like linchpin in someone's life, that moment you know you can't walk away from, is such a pivotal sort of story framework in Our Father the Devil.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, incredible
Yeah.
stakes and like so character driven. And I think yeah, that makes so much sense. It's funny how these tiny moments that like just by osmosis kind of shape you as a kid really
Yeah.
inform your later storytelling.
Yeah, I think I'm just, for me, it's all about character,
Mhm.
that's what draws us in. That's what makes us, characters are what make us care.
Right.
What's happening with this person? Why are they making the choices that they're making? What is it about their background that's informing these things? How is it affecting the people around them? How is it affecting the relationships, the key relationships in their lives? And ultimately, like, is this a journey that we want to go on as viewers? For me, those are the key questions I ask myself when I'm starting to write something, and trying to find a way to either explore a character in a way that I feel hasn't been done before, or in a way that I think reveals something quite universal about the human condition, which I think is why we go to watch films, is to, we're looking for, I mean, some people go to escape, but I think ultimately we are looking to see ourselves in some way. We recognize ourselves even within the most outrageous, the most like crazy worlds or characters. There is always that moment of connection that we feel with characters that makes us care.
That's so interesting because from the first frame of the film, when you see Marie through the window and it's, sort of a doubled, obscured image,
Yeah.
um, I feel like the movie resists the traditional sort of like screen identification with the protagonist of the movie for quite some time into the filmic narrative. And then there's a switch when suddenly you begin to understand what's happening underneath. But I feel like you really intentionally resisted the convention of screen identification.
Absolutely, because I think for me, this is a woman who is hiding, who has so much baggage. And because we're sort of peeling back, at least the way I wanted people to experience the film was that they're slowly peeling back the layers of who is this woman? Why is she behaving this way when this priest arrives? And so the way that I wanted to present her was in a way that I feel most of the people around her see her, which is that
Mm,
she's kind of an enigma. They only see the surface. They don't see everything that's like underneath.
yeah.
And so that just felt like the right way to introduce her.
Yeah, I was also wondering, so much of, I mean, the layers of being a woman of color, being an
Yeah.
immigrant. I think there's like a societal requirement to put up a kind of veneer of stoicism and everything's fine all the time because any sort of like utterance of like I'm not okay or I'm a fragile being is unacceptable and um not allowed. Was that kind of part of that commentary?
Um, I would say yes, but I would even say it goes deeper. It's more cultural because I think in Africa, especially, mental health services are still a new thing. It's like we're taught that we just sort of have to deal with our problems and move on, like sweep things under the rug. And there's a lot of sweeping under the rug. There isn't a lot of time to stop and to process and to even share what you're feeling, what happened to you. I feel like this is sort of a new wave right now, or in the last couple of years. And so it's also kind of a commentary on that and on how particularly women of color have to be strong, have to constantly just like carry on regardless of what they've been through, regardless of the scars they're trying to heal from. And so it's also part of Marie's problem in that she doesn't know how to ask for help. She doesn't know how to tell her friend, hey, this is what's happening. This is what I'm dealing with, and it almost kills her.
Yeah, yeah. I found that in fact, because you initially resisted the sort of like surrogate identification with Marie, by the time you are actually with her, that connection is so much deeper. And you
Yeah,
really you've kind of like penetrated the superficial layer of identification and feel it in a much more complex, concrete way.
that's great. I mean, it's what I hoped people would feel. Because I also think when you're yearning to understand a character and you're leaning in, it's like in a way that strategy was to try and push the audience to lean in, to try to understand, to try to want to get to know her. And then by the time you start getting access, then hopefully you are invested in what she's going through. So I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, and did you deploy like cinematic like strategies, visual strategies to kind of do that? Because I know you have a really close relationship with your cinematographer. Like, were you thinking about it in terms of the visuals on screen as well?
Yeah, I think the cinematography, is, I mean, part of it was to try and build tension, but also it was always a balance of building tension, but also like, when do we give access to her? When do we withhold it?
Mm,
And I think that we tried to be very selective with her close-ups
mhm.
so that when we do give you a close-up, that's kind of when you lean in. And so it was all just threading that balance between, building the tightrope between what is happening internally, because we know also people aren't going to understand, especially early on, like what exactly is happening internally. And I think, trying to play with the thriller tropes, the thriller genres, and the thriller genre in a way that we found to be exciting. I love a slow burn. I love when I feel like something is bubbling underneath. I don't quite know what it is, but I know that something terrible is going to happen. So that was very much part of our discussion in building the visual language of the film.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I was thinking about its classification as a thriller, which it definitely like resides in, but I was wondering, did you ever think of it in terms of horror? I mean, I'm a little biased because it's a horror magazine, but I
Yeah.
feel like there are so many horror like horrific elements to it.
Absolutely. And even in the language, we definitely leaned on sort of the slow pans, the slow zooms, and we certainly leaned on a kind of cinematic horror language to build this world. But I think it maybe wasn't intentional. It might be because horror is so baked into my way of seeing things. And you're right, in a way it is a kind of almost like a social horror, because
Totally.
it it's not only an excavation of like the horror from her past, but it's like the horror of like, oh my God, I'm face to face with this man that I haven't seen in all this time, this man who is responsible for basically destroying me, destroying my entire family. And he's here in this town and no one else knows who he is. And I carry the burden of like, of the truth. And
Yeah.
what do I do? For me, that is like one of the most horrific situations one could find themselves in. So I think it was probably an unconscious decision, but it's definitely part of my cinematic language as a filmmaker.
Yeah, and all of those movies that you were watching on VHS.
Oh my
Oh,
God, The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. Me and my brother have probably seen it 100 times. It's one of our favorite films.
I mean, you can't be Carpenter, can you?
No, you really can't.
And you know what was interesting was I was actually really reading the film through the lens of rape revenge.
Mm,
I don't know like how familiar you are with the
I am.
subgenre. Amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I was thinking like, on like a textual level, you have the assault and you have this kind of like interior knowledge of Father Patrick that only Marie has access to that I feel like is really kind of similar. But the thing that I love on a more like subtextual level about rape revenge is that so rarely are you given access to female rage on screen. And
Yeah.
it's like the only subgenre where you really see the woman as both protagonist and antagonist.
Yes.
I was wondering what you thought of that reading.
It's spot on. Although it's funny because it's not the first time this has come up,
Oh, okay.
obviously.
Mhm.
But and it makes perfect sense to me. I think again, not a conscious decision, but
Sure.
like in looking at the film and reading the film afterwards, it's definitely there. And I think I also felt that lack of not of women, female characters on screen not being allowed to let out that rage very often. And I was just very interested from the beginning, from the conception of the film. I was very interested in exploring this tension between victim or hero and villain, and essentially wanting to play with a character who embodies both. And so for me, Our Father the Devil, in the title, there is this dichotomy already, like this juxtaposition. And for me, Marie is the villain of this movie.
Mm,
It's not Father Patrick. She is
mm,
both hero and villain. And I find that to be incredibly interesting and refreshing,
yeah.
because I think it's so human that we all embody the capabilities of doing good and of being evil at the same time. And we have to accept that in ourselves. We have to accept that duality, that very uncomfortable reality that someone could be, it's like when people commit, I don't know, horrific acts, and you hear people say, oh my God, but they used to deliver food to people on Sunday, and they used to, how could he can't be that person, or she couldn't have done that because she used to do all this good stuff. And I'm like, yes, and that person is still capable of committing unspeakable evil, so for me that was much more interesting to kind of challenge an audience to, because I also think as audiences we tend to want to put characters in one category or another. Even the notes sometimes that execs give when they tell you that a character is unlikable, it's like, but that's being human. Like,
Yeah.
we're not likable all the time, so yeah, it was very much something I wanted to explore and wanted to see how an audience would, you know, would how they would ingest a character like her.
Yeah. And what I love and what far beyond the rape revenge, framework is that you're asking a larger question of all the characters of who deserves to be forgiven. It's
Absolutely.
applicable to everyone. And I think that layer of complexity is so refreshing and new to see because, like you said, I think we're so like spoon-fed, likable,
Yeah.
positive female characters, or at least like a redemption tale at the end.
Yeah.
And I love that you provide real like moral ambiguity, which is not like really in vogue. I like that you don't you allow the audience to sit with that and to have it be murky and gray.
Yeah. And for me, it's kind of what I yearn for when I'm
Hmm.
watching films. I want the filmmaker to trust me more. I want to kind of make my own decision about who I think these people are. I don't want to be spoon-fed. I don't want a certain narrative forced down my throat. I think for me, those are the films that are the most interesting. I think of Michael Haneke's The Piano Teacher.
Hmm. So
Those,
good.
yeah, even Punch Drunk Love. I think
Mhm.
those are the films that really stayed with me because I was like, what do I, like, how do I process these characters, and then it makes you, yeah, it just makes you think of it, it lingers. Those films linger for those reasons.
Piano Teacher is such an interesting comp. That's a really cool way to like to think through the movie. That's really exciting.
I mean,
Um,
she's batshit crazy,
she's
but like,
fucking nuts, but
but
I love her. I mean, it's
I
amazing.
love her. Yeah,
It's refreshing, like you said.
agreed. Yeah.
I was also curious about the setting of the movie,
Mm.
because I was thinking about like you have this main character who's so tied and struggling with her past, and like
Mm.
where does the division between past and present exist, and it's very fluid and entangling. And then I was thinking about the fact that she works in a retirement home where all of the residents kind of only have access to the past, or
Yeah.
the present is sort of like a limbo space. Um, and Marie is like in control of mediating her patient's relationship to past and present, and um, but simultaneously she has a really abusive and authoritative boss. And I was thinking like there was something there in the connection between the work that she was doing and her sort of history with abuse in powerful positions. And I don't know, was that were those themes kind of conscious in choosing that as the setting?
Um, yes. In terms of her being with older residents who are essentially, like, as you said, more living in the past, and their present is more in limbo because they're, kind of nearing the end of their lives. And I think even Jeanne's character, who tries to give Marie some kind of important life lessons in terms of what she's taking away now that she's nearing the end of her own life. That was definitely conscious. And I also think because Maria is living in the past. I mean, she hasn't been able to move on personally, emotionally. And although she's walking around, putting on this shell like she's a normal person, she goes home and has nightmares every night, so she's living with the PTSD of what happened to her. I didn't necessarily view her boss as, I guess you could say she's abusive, but this is like kind of an everyday, unfortunately, my mom's a nurse. And so I
Mm.
consulted her when I was building the character of Sabine, who is Marie's boss. And, these microaggressions that you deal with at work is just sort of like the product of, institutionalized racism. This is what, and I think for Marie, this woman is just sort of like a non, she's just doing her, she's just like, I think Marie is able to disappear in her work, and for the most part doesn't have that much friction with her boss. And so she's able to sort of disappear into this role that she has and doesn't push back much unless something, like the incident that happens early on in the movie with her sous chef, like, but for the most part, Maria is very comfortable sort of just taking orders. Like she doesn't need to be, I don't think that she is someone at this stage that is going to be pushing back on authority, unless, unless she really has to. And so I think she's very happy just going with the flow of the sort of the hierarchy of this job. But I also think she likes the fact that there is a hierarchy, that
Mm.
I think this is something in her, probably from the past, that is very much informing her decision to work in this place, the way that she runs her kitchen, and the way that, it's informing a lot of her routines. And I think she is a person of routines, and things don't really, the more things like sort of stay, it's like when you're comfortable in a routine, that's sort of it, in a way. It's how do I say this? There's a kind of a comfort in,
Sure.
even if it is an abusive environment, it's what she's comfortable with it, because she doesn't know any different, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think like after having endured chaos and unending trauma, a place with like rigor and schedules and routine
Yeah.
provides a sort of comfort.
Yeah.
Um, how did you choose where to film?
So that town is actually my producer's hometown.
Oh, wow.
And we were looking for, I said, it needs to be a small town in Europe. I wrote the film in French, so, we were looking at, and I wanted like mountains. I knew I wanted it to be in a kind of a beautiful, idyllic setting where you don't expect this kind of violence to happen.
Mm,
I also wanted it to be in a town where there weren't many people of color, so that I could isolate Marie and Nadia even more, her best friend. Um, and my producer basically said to me, I'm kind of from a town like this, and
mm,
shared a documentary that his mother made several years back. And then we went to scout it in the winter of 2019. And as soon as I got there, it just was like, I knew it was perfect.
mm,
It's an aging town, in the sense that like there are a lot of young people leaving. And so there's an emptiness, there's a darkness underneath that beauty
mm.
that felt so right, pitch perfect for this film. And yet, I mean, everyone there is very warm and very sweet, but I just that contrast between the beauty of the landscape and the secrets that lie underneath was very present in the town. And so we just sort of lean into that, and it seemed to work really well.
Yeah, oh my gosh, and that cabin
Yeah,
with the vista, it's so spectacular. And you're
it
right.
is.
Like I think that the setting was sort of uncommon to
Yeah,
have like a thriller or a horror movie against like such natural beauty was really exciting.
yeah,
Not
it
some
was.
like, saw warehouse, you know?
Yeah, I think it makes the violence less expected.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, yeah, speaking about the violence of the movie, I mean, the cross-cutting montage with the cooking and the like initiation ritual, I was in heaven. That was incredible. But
Thank you.
you really had there was such a mastery of like aligning the violence and then choosing really specifically where to show it, almost like you were speaking about the use of close-ups, like thinking it felt very intentional where you showed the violence and the spaces
Yeah.
where you left it out. Can you talk a little bit about how you made those decisions?
Yeah, I think I knew, I didn't want, for me, it wasn't about seeing Father Patrick be tortured. Like, I felt like I didn't want to re-traumatize an audience, because I was also thinking that the people who would be watching this film, or some of the people who would be drawn to this film, might be people who were coming from a similar background, who are, maybe refugees, immigrants, who are coming from God knows what kinds of atrocities they left behind in their hometowns. And I was like, I don't want to re-traumatize an audience like that. I didn't think seeing the physical violence on screen would add anything.
Hmm.
For me, that violence was much more psychological, and I felt like there was more power in sort of playing with sound design, using off-screen violence, and also for me, just as a horror movie buff, like often it's what you don't see on screen that is much more terrifying because you're imagining something so much worse than what a filmmaker can create. And also on the limited budget that we had, it just felt like a very smart strategy
Hmm.
to kind of allow the audience's imagination to take over and to just like use the sounds, his screams, to infer like what she's doing to him. And that I think ended up being very effective.
Yeah, it is like the less you see of the monster, the more terrifying it is.
Yeah,
Absolutely. It's always
yeah.
a disappointment when you see it in real
Right. You're
life.
like, oh, this thing?
That's
Right.
and you mentioned working with a really small budget, and I know a lot of our audience are filmmakers, and a lot of us, including myself, work on really small budgets. I would love to know kind of your process of how you got this movie made and how you worked within those constraints of the budget, because it certainly doesn't
Yeah.
feel like a cheap movie.
Thank you. That was my goal from the beginning. The film was made through the Venice Biennale College, which is a program that funds micro budget films under 200,000 euros. And I I think my DP and I think one of the beauties of it's an amazing opportunity, but obviously the challenges of like knowing where to put that money. I think we were always focused on trying to keep as much of it on screen as possible. And so the main thing was like, okay, how can we maximize the 20 days that we have to shoot this? So it was really
Yeah.
like tightening the script. I think I had cut down 20 pages out of my script, really just like, yeah, because I was like, there were places where I found like dialogue just to be useless, and I wanted those silences. I wanted to just like, Maria's not very chatty to begin with. I mean, I think the most chatty she is in the cabin with Father Patrick, but I think with her friends in general and her daily life is not a very chatty person. And I feel like I love that. I love that that allowed us to sort of wonder, what is she thinking? What is she feeling? And so part of it was, as I said, like truncating that script, making sure that we could really focus on the scenes that we were shooting. I didn't want to try to rush through shooting things just to like toss them out because they don't quite work. And then it was, really being very intentional with our shot list. In general, I don't shoot a lot of coverage. I really like me and my DP shot listed and we do like photo boards, and so we go in really having a very clear sense of what we're trying to get visually in each scene, like what is the key moment that we need to have, so that if ever we need to make changes, which often we do when we go in to shoot it, then we still know what the kernel of that scene is and we can make adjustments based on that. But I think just going in very specifically, very intentionally with the shot list, and you know just trying to manage the performances. I mean, it wasn't easy, but that's ultimately how we did it.
20 days. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's that's tight. And I was wondering, so when what was how, like how long did the whole pre-production production from beginning to end? How long were you working on the movie?
Well, I got into this program in 2019, but then COVID hit, so I had another year to work on the
Hmm.
script, which was quite helpful. It was pretty much a gift. That's kind of in that year is when I cut those 20 pages.
Hmm.
Um, and I think we started pre-production. Let's see, we started principal photography on June 8th. So pre-production was probably like 3 weeks or a month before that. Yeah, it's crazy. It was very
Yeah.
tight.
Yeah.
Also because I mean, imagine the pandemic, we're flying over, half our crew is from the US. So we couldn't afford to like house people for 2 months while we're like just sitting around figuring things out. So
Right.
everyone arrived like about, I would say at least me, my DP, the core, the key crew arrived about 3 weeks before.
Hmm.
And we had our production designer, incredible production designer, who was already in France. Um, and yeah, and so it was that, we had 3 days of rehearsal with my main cast. And it was mostly just like going through some of the stunts and, rehearsing that final scene, which was something that was still very like not very, it wasn't very solid when I was still figuring out how to end this movie, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah.
And I feel like I had to see that scene on its feet to really know that that it was working on the page. And I made a few adjustments based on discoveries we made in rehearsal, which was really great.
Cool.
And then the love scene, like finding the choreography of the love scene. Those were like really the main things that we worked on. And then it was sort of like the 20 days of production. And then the difficult, tricky thing was trying to get the film ready in time for Venice that
Mm.
September, which was very hard.
Oh my gosh. And was
Yeah.
that like pre-intimacy coordinator
It
still?
was right around the time that it started to become a thing.
Hmm.
And so it was tricky for us because we didn't, especially with COVID and having like, we didn't have access to one, but um, our, our, my two actors, I had like really candid conversations with them about like how we were going to do this. And we really let Marie, Babetita Saggio, who plays Marie, she really took the lead on
Mm.
this. I think Frank, the actor who played Arnaud, it was like the three of us really sort of came up with the choreography in a very safe space. And I'm really proud of that scene because I feel like Babetita told me afterwards that it was the most safe she ever felt on set.
Oh,
She
that's
felt like,
incredible.
yeah, it was, I took so much care and I was like putting myself in her shoes. And me being an actor as well, I know how delicate it is and how things can go wrong in a split second. And but I'm really proud of the work we did and the sort of care that went into preparing that scene and making sure that they were both comfortable.
And I love the time you take with it. Like
Mm,
it's such it's a delicate scene, it's a thoughtful scene, and it's an investigative scene. You're
yeah.
with them in that experience of like in
Mhm.
each moment deciding to continue.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that so much. And I could kind of get the feeling that it was being led by Babatita,
Mm,
that there was a really beautiful, just like feeling of control that was emanating through the screen that I think maybe it wouldn't have been the case if it had been choreographed by a third
absolutely.
party. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so happy you said that because I was actually feeling the same thing
Mm,
that we were being led by her, and I
mm.
think that that's what added to this investigatory like element that you're speaking to, which is so what the scene is.
Yes.
It's he's waiting for her, you know what I mean? He doesn't know what happened to her, but he knows that something
Yes.
is, you know what I mean? And so this is the scene when her wall comes down. This is the scene when she's able to take back control. And so I think that Tanks, who's just he had such an incredible connection with Babetita the whole film.
Mm,
I feel like he felt her. I mean, there was that camera. A lot of this scene wasn't planned in terms of like, uh, uh, we knew he'd be following them, but like
mhm.
he really was like sort of feeling it out. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's one of my favorite scenes for that reason.
Yeah, really like a prime example of like allowing the circumstances of the actual production to really inform the content of the scene, which was
Absolutely.
really beautiful to see. And those scenes are so hard and scary.
Yeah.
It's
It's terrifying.
it's
I
so
think I was way more scared than Babetita was. I
yeah.
was shaking. I was nervous. I was like, "Oh my God, do you need anything?" Like, I think we only did maybe 3 takes or maybe 4 takes of that, And between each take, I was like coming to her, like, can I, I was like hugging her, like, what do you
Yeah.
need? And she was like, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Like,
They're like,
go back to
I
your
just,
monitor.
dude, chill out. I'm like, oh my God.
She was like, go back to your monitor. I'm fine.
That's
It's like,
amazing.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's gnarly.
Yeah. I was a
And
wreck.
yeah, the worst, the worst. And I was wondering, because I know your background is in acting yourself.
Yeah.
So um uh, how does that inform your directing? Like how do you work with your actors and build character with them?
It's everything.
Mhm.
I think I understand that actors work very differently, that they have different needs, different actors, different practices, different techniques, different likes and dislikes. Some actors, and it's about building trust ultimately. I think that's something that when you work as an actor, you want to know that you're in good hands, and you also want your director to trust you. You want to be able to offer ideas. You want to be able to bring yourself into the role. You don't want a director that's micromanaging your performance. I think there's nothing I hated more than that when I was an
Mm,
actor, and having directors give me result driven direction, like, okay, in this moment you need to cry, like, but why though,
yeah.
and so I really enjoy the collaboration of working with actors, and like allowing them to bring ideas. I mean, that's why you casting a specific actor, is that they're going to bring something to the role that you can't, that you don't have, or that you haven't even written into it, so then you have to allow them to do that. And it's very exciting when they start to sort of give ideas, and at some point you have to accept that they're going to know the character better than you do. And so when they're pushing back on something, there's a reason, so you have to listen to what that is. I'm not saying that you always have to change it when an actor has doesn't want to do something. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is you have to hear what it is that they're saying, and really ask yourself if there isn't something to that, if they're
Mm,
not actually helping you go a bit deeper, because I find that often they are, and
mm,
often they're pointing to an issue in the script that you do need to address. So for me, it's my favorite thing to work with actors, and to just like allow them to spread their wings, and to jump into the characters. And I love that moment when I realize, okay, I've done my job. They know, when I see the characters come to life, it is the most magical thing ever. It really is. I'll never forget the first day of shooting. When we shot the first scene, we started with cabin stuff, which was tricky, but the first scene we shot, when Babetita transformed into Marie, I could feel that, first of all, you could hear a pin drop, but also I could feel everyone else's, oh my God, like,
mm.
Marie's in the room. You know what I mean? Like, we felt that, like that. And then I think we all felt a certain responsibility to not mess up, to make sure that we're capturing her performance the way that it should be captured. I know that my DP felt it. I know that, I mean, it's just magical.
I just got chills hearing about it. Um, and I have to ask you about the lipstick. I mean,
Well, this segues perfectly to the lipstick, because the lipstick was not in my script. This was an idea that Babetita brought me.
oh my God.
And I'm just like, yes. I mean, it was the perfect way to visually show the armor coming down, and to see, I mean, she's wearing black lipstick, the top of the film, and it's almost like, don't talk to me, like I'm not, and it's like, it's almost like the death of her sexuality almost,
Oh, that's a beautiful
um
idea. Yeah.
and that is my favorite, one of my favorite scenes, when she's in the car and she's just like, she makes the decision to invite this man. It's like, to say like, all right, I'm open to flirting. I'm open to something, to the possibility of something developing between us. That scene, that moment that leads to the bar, that leads to the alleyway, with that whole little, it's, yeah, probably my favorite. because I want so badly for this woman to let go. I want so badly for her to be normal, to be able to find love. And um that was a moment when we were shooting that I was like, it didn't even feel like I wrote it. It felt
Mm,
like it felt like it had the script, the film had taken on a life of itself.
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's incredible that she brought that to you. I mean,
Yeah.
what a moment. There was no dialogue needed. Like it was just
No.
spoke volumes.
Yeah.
Did you write in the script the black lipstick?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, amazing. That also is like such a cool choice and so visually captivating and
Mm.
just like adds a complicated dimension right up front with nothing else, like not what you would typically wear to the workplace. Like it's just very arresting and provided
Yeah.
a complexity that was immediately really you knew there was something deeper going on there.
Yeah.
Um, this issue of the magazine is themed hysteria, and we're looking at like the legacy of female hysteria and then also bringing it into contemporary like gender expansive landscape and thinking about how it might be reframed and reshaped. And I was thinking a lot about this movie in the context of hysteria and just like um the way in which sexual assault survivors have to kind of always be um navigating um a sort of like crazy uh definition, like anytime similar to what we were speaking about before, like when the veneer comes down, when you're not stoic and perfect, when the
Yeah.
trauma comes through, um and this kind of like gaslighting experience, this experience of female hysteria felt so like active in the film for me. And it was almost it felt as a like almost like a celebration of allowing all of the shades of inner life and trauma to kind of be out in the open and expressed as a way of accessing a kind of freedom.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. For me, I felt like I thought it was really important to provide that space because, you know, I'm not a survivor of sexual assault or sexual violence of any kind, thankfully. But in using my empathy to try to put myself in the shoes of someone who might be, I feel that no one has the right to tell you how to process your trauma. And this was for me an opportunity to allow that rage to come out in the most in whatever way, I had no idea how the performances was gonna unfold, which was part of the excitement of having a front seat to it. But I think we all on set felt a collective sigh, a collective like just the release of that. And it's probably the thing I'm the most proud of. I've had a lot of
Mm.
screenings of this film, and I've had a lot of survivors come up to me and say, thank you for making this film, and that they were screaming right along with Babetita's character, and that I feel that that's important. It's important to understand also that everyone processes their trauma very differently. But I also think it's to what you said earlier, as women, we don't often get the space or we're not often allowed to scream or to, to let go, or at least to we're not allowed to express ourselves in a way that seems maybe I don't even know what the word is, but like there, even just the word hysteria, like that is often attributed to women, like if you are not like completely in control of yourself, if you're not buttoned up, if you're not, just like, if you're not following a certain etiquette, like you're deemed as hysterical. And I think for me, just wanted to do away with that. And there was a certain joy, there was a certain release there was a lot of joy actually that I think some of us on set, because I had a lot of women on set, we had from just like we had that release right along with Marie,
Mm.
you know, and you don't even have to be a survivor of sexual trauma to have that. It can be attributed to so many different kinds of other types of traumas. And for me, that was very cathartic is the word.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what's so interesting is when Father Patrick initially arrives and you see her reaction, but you're still being kept at a distance
Yeah.
from her, you're afraid for her. But in
Yeah.
fact, as the narrative unfolds, you realize that she's not afraid of her own safety. She's afraid of her own violence. And I think
Yes.
that
Yeah.
that is so powerful because that the capacity for women to be dangerous is really kept from us. And
Absolutely.
it's so cathartic, as you said, to see it on screen as something that's investigated and given room to be explored and felt. That was absolutely one of my favorite parts of the film.
Yeah.
Um, I'd love to know what you're working on now, if you can share.
Yeah, I've got a horror movie.
No way.
I do. I mean, it was working on a sci-fi horror. I can't
Oh
share
my,
too many
sure,
details,
sure.
but it's an adaptation and I'm working with the author and he's brilliant and it's a very unusual sci-fi horror that again explores female identity, it explores ambition, um, and it explores also, you know, the parts of ourselves that we're often running from, but that make us who we are, and that ultimately, you know, might save us from certain dangers. And I'm really excited to be moving into this space, like in a more literal way. Like I feel like with Our Father the Devil, a lot of people picked up on some of the horror, the horror tones in the cinematic language of the film, and so you know, and I feel like, yes, now I can step into that genre in a much more direct way, which is nice. And I'm also working on a thriller, a thriller about the end of a 40-year marriage, which I'm also very excited by. And
Oh my
just looking
gosh.
at a marriage from a perspective that I don't think people have yet. And that one, they're both very unique and very interesting films and
I'm
very
so
different.
excited. I cannot wait to see what your horror movie is.
Oh,
I'm waiting.
Buck, it's gonna be so crazy when it's announced. It's gonna be insane.
How long do you think we have to wait to find out?
Hopefully not much longer. I'm
Okay.
working with an incredible producers and our script is done. So we are moving into the casting phase and you know, so that hopefully, you know, soon there will be some kind of an announcement and
Okay, when that
uh
deadline article comes out, we're gonna be cheering over here.
please do, please do. I
I'm so
appreciate
excited.
that.
Yeah, our I know that our audience will be beside themselves with excitement like I am. Um,
Well,
well, thank you so much. This was an absolute joy. And
it was for me too.
you're so inspirational. And yeah, it was such a privilege to get to talk with you.
Thank you. It was a privilege to be here and talking with you as well. Thank you for, you know, for putting the word out on this movie, which can be found on the Criterion channel for those of
Yes.
you who haven't seen it yet and want to see it. I feel so blessed and so lucky to have had made a first film that has this kind of impact and that is hopefully going to continue to build its legs, you know, in the years to come. And yeah, thanks for allowing me to talk about it.
Oh man, and also just like shout out to having your first feature on Criterion. That is pretty badass.
Thank you. It's part of the crazy journey of this movie. It's been one crazy thing after the other. I feel super blessed. It's a
Well,
testament, I think, also to the amazing work that my cast and crew did. I feel very, very indebted to them.
I mean, anybody who hasn't seen it is missing out, and we are very excited to promote it and get it out there even more. It's spectacular.
Thank you.